Every year I look forward to St. Patrick's Day. Now, maybe that's just because I'm a big fan of green Bud Light. Hey, don't judge me. But I know it's also because I get to eat a ton of corned beef. And in my opinion, the best way to cook corned beef is to sous vide it. I'm going to dive into everything you need to know and tell you why coming up next. Hey there, I'm Jason Logston from Amazing Food Made Easy and president of the International Sous Vide Association. And today we're going to be talking about one of my favorite things to sous vide, and that is corned beef. There's a lot of different ways you can cook corned beef, but to me, sous vide is one of the easiest and it gives you the most consistent results every time that you use it. If you don't know what corned beef really is, it's basically when you take a brisket, either a brisket flat or a brisket point, and you cure it. You put it in a brine for 5 to 7 days, and then it's ready to cook. And it gets this nice pink color, and it has a nice texture and flavor to it that's pretty unique and different from a normally cooked brisket. It's one of my favorite things, and it's used in a lot of American Italian dishes, and Reubens are one of my favorite things to eat corned beef in. I could eat Reubens all day long, pretty much every day. A lot of people ask, why would you sous vide corned beef? What's the point of doing that compared to cooking it as a braise or some of the other methods that you can make corned beef? And to me, it's all about consistency and accuracy. With sous vide, you can get the exact texture you want from corned beef, and you can also achieve a few that you can't get during normal traditional cooking methods. For example, corned beef cooked at 131 degrees is amazing. You just can't get that if you're doing a braise because you're raising the temperature so high. But at 131, you have this tender, really juicy, moist corned beef, and it's amazing on sandwiches or with corned beef and cabbage. You can also go more traditional. I like 152 for more traditional corned beef. It's starting to flake apart, the connective tissue is breaking down, but it still has a lot more juice and moisture to it than using a traditional method. And if you really just want a traditional corned beef, then 165 or even 176 is going to be that kind of falling apart, not maintaining much structure. All the juice has been squeezed out into a flavorful sauce like you would normally get when you traditionally braise a corned beef. When it comes to making corned beef, you can either just buy some at the grocery store that's pre-cured, or you can buy a brisket and cure your own. It's actually a pretty easy process if it's something you're interested in. It does take like a week to cure it, but it's only time that's sitting in the fridge. It's not any active time. So if you're interested, I have a great article and video about how to cure your own corned beef at home, but buying it from the grocery store is not a bad way to go, especially if you stick with a few different brands that are a little more high quality. You can look at the ingredients list and see which ones aren't adding a lot of preservatives to it. So what is the perfect time and temperature for sous vide corned beef? Well, there's no correct answer, but there's two that I really like. The one is 135 for 1 to 2 days. This is going to be more steak-like, it's going to be juicier than a traditional corned beef, and it's going to be amazingly flavorful. It's definitely worth trying, and it comes out with a lot firmer texture than a lot of corned beef does. I really like it for corned beef and cabbage and thin cut for Reubens. I think it's just amazing. The other one that I really like is 152, again for 1 to 2 days. At that temperature, you're starting to break down some of the connective tissue. It's going to start tasting more traditionally braised, and I really like this, again, with corned beef and cabbage, but also for thick cut Reubens, because it's going to come apart when you bite it. You're not going to have to chew on it at all, and it has just a great texture that I think translates to a lot of different dishes. Like I said, some people like a more traditional texture, and if you go up to 165, it's really going to be breaking apart the connective tissue, and it's going to be a lot more similar to a traditional texture. So a lot of people like that. It's usually about 1 to 2 days still, but probably on the shorter side in most cases because it is a higher temperature. If you really want traditional, then 176 for 12 to 24 hours is a go-to for really breaking down everything, and it's going to be fork tender. You can just eat it with a fork and don't need a knife, and it's great for a lot of different preparations if you're looking for that traditional texture. So now you know how hot and how long to sous vide your corned beef. Let's dive into what the sous vide process actually looks like. And to help with this, I'm going to link up my favorite simple sous vide corned beef master recipe. It makes it easy to perfectly cook your corned beef every single time at the exact temperature and texture that you want. Then you can apply it to any normal corned beef recipe that you've grown up eating or that you want to try. There's a lot on the internet that you can find that's not sous vide. So find some of those. You can use my master recipe to cook the corned beef perfectly. Then you can put it into their recipes and enjoy the other sides and accompaniments without having overcooked dry corned beef. So first you want to prep the corned beef. Now, if you're curing your own, that would involve the entire curing process, making the brine, letting it brine for a week or so, then drying it off and getting ready to cook it. If you buy it from the store, you can usually just take it out of the package and it's probably going to be ready to go. There's not a lot of excess fat and connective tissue on most briskets when they've been prepared for corned beef. But if there is some, you can remove any of that kind of tough connective tissue on the outside. One of the other things to keep in mind is that a lot of corned beef is all brined with a lot of salt, and so a lot of it's pretty salty. And traditionally, you would put it in a lot of water, and then you would either boil it or braise it in the oven. And that water pulls out a lot of the salt content, leaving the meat still pretty well seasoned. Well, with sous vide, you're not cooking it in a lot of water usually, and so it can taste salty. So one of the things I like to do is put the brisket into a kind of a big container of water for a few hours, if not overnight. That'll help draw out some of that salt content, and it will allow you to more enjoy it on the other side, because otherwise it can be pretty salty depending on the preparation of your final dish. When you put it in the bag, I like to add the spice packet if one came with it, if it's store-bought, or I'll add kind of another layer of spices if I cured it myself. I'll leave the salt out because, like I said, it's already going to be salty enough, but re-adding some of those classic corned beef spices to it is a good way to re-amp up that flavor, especially if you had to let it soak for a bit. So you take your cured, spice packet coated corned beef and you put it in a sous vide bag and seal it. You can use any type of sous vide bag that's heat safe and food safe. Ziplocs work well for some of the lower cook temperatures, but it is a longer time, so I would usually double bag if I'm using Ziplocs. You can also use a Food Saver Edge vacuum sealer or any of those type of edge sealers, or a chambered vacuum sealer. Corned beef already has a dense texture and you're not going to hurt it by any of the sealing processes. If you're doing a large corned beef, there's nothing wrong with cutting it up into portions. It's rare to serve an entire one, on the table together. So cutting it up into sizes that is more manageable for the sealing process is a good way to go. It's not going to change the cook time any because the thickness of the brisket doesn't change, but it will make it easier to find bags that fit and to fit them all into your water bath. Once it's sealed, you just get your water bath together. You can use any large container, stock pot, a polycarbonate container like Lapave, Rubbermaid, or Cambro. And then you just set your sous vide machine to the desired temperature that you picked. Like I said, I like 135 or 152. Other people like to go higher depending on what you're trying to achieve. Place a sous vide bag in the water bath and let it go. You don't have to worry about the machine coming up to temperature first. It's a long cook time and you don't have to let it preheat or anything like that. But when you put it in the water, make sure that all the meat is below the surface of the water. If any sticks up, it will foster bacterial growth and it can become an unsafe situation. I like to use sous vide magnets to help ensure the bag stays below. They just kind of simplify the process of keeping the bags where you want in the water bath. You then just let it cook for as long as you need it to cook for. Like I said, 1 to 2 days is generally the sweet spot for a lot of corned beef and briskets. And then once it's cooked and fully tenderized, remove it from the hot water bath. And at this point, there's kind of two schools of thought. Some people like to serve it as is right away. And if it's for the 135 range, I like to serve it right away. There's not as much benefit, I don't think, to letting it sit. If you're up in the 150, 165, 176, then letting it cool off completely in its own juices and sit overnight is something that a lot of people feel adds a lot of flavor to the meat. And if you do that, just let it sit on the counter for 10 or 15 minutes, then throw it in an ice water bath to really bring that core temperature down as quickly as possible. And if you used a vacuum sealer, it's going to then last in your fridge for 1 to 2 weeks. So you can do this ahead of time and put together a lot of meals last minute that are going to be really flavorful and tasty. When you reheat it, just reheat it to a lower temperature than you originally sous vided it at. I feel like most corned beef dishes don't have a sear on it. Traditionally, this is a braised dish, and a lot of times it's a boiled dish. And so with the sous vide process, it comes out looking pretty similar to how most corned beef looks. But if you do want to put a sear on it, make sure you dry it off really well with paper towels or dishcloths. You can either sear it in the broiler on a broil pan, or you can put it in a cast iron pan or a hot skillet to just give it a little crust on it. Like I said, most corned beef briskets aren't actually seared. It does come out looking pretty similar to a lot of them, depending on what your final dish is. So in a lot of cases, once it's done with the sous vide process, it's then ready to be served. There's a lot of different ways to serve corned beef. Some of my favorites are to thinly slice it and serve it on, some sauerkraut on rye bread for Reubens. Corned beef and cabbage is a classic. I like to, after I've sliced it and trimmed it for some different dishes, I like to use kind of the trimmings for corned beef hash for breakfast. There's a lot of different ways that you can prepare corned beef, and there's so many dishes that it works in. It's one of my favorite types of meat, and hopefully you'll get as much out of it as I will. So now you know how to perfectly sous vide corned beef every time. If you have any comments below, please drop them in the comment section, and I'll be happy to answer anything that comes up, any questions that you have. For people getting started, I always recommend my free sous vide quick start course at afmeasy.com/quickstart. And I also do a lot of work with the International Sous Vide Association, including free showcases, demos, and cook-alongs at the isva.org. Till next time, I'm Jason Logsdon.